George Gurdjieff, Robin Amos, and the Collapse of Western Civilization. Robin Amos and George Gurdjieff had many things in common. One of these was a prophetic voice about the future of Western civilization. Their individual work within esoteric circles had a common theme, namely, Western civilization was in trouble, deep, deep trouble. George Gurdjieff, with his enigmatic personality and his deeply profound and fundamentally compassionate intellect, sought to present the West with some Eastern ideas. These ideas, essentially whispers of a long-forgotten and rumored tradition of the inner church, were the missing pieces of the puzzle as the major religion of the West, namely Western Christianity, i.e. Catholicism and Protestantism, had grown into physical maturity without the benefit of an inner tradition. Every major religion has an inner tradition, with the Hindu having yoga, Islam has Sufism, Buddhism has its Zen, and Judaism with Kabbalah. But Christianity had nothing to speak of regarding the inner tradition. When Christianity experienced the Great Schism in 1054 AD, with Rome and Constantinople divorcing and going their separate ways, Rome, and consequently Protestantism, was cut off from this inner tradition. Gurdjieff sought to bring this inner tradition to the West without the baggage of religious and theological imagery. His method and imagery and personality still captivate the West, even after more than a century after G's physical presence left this temporal reality. Robin Amos, having been born 17 years before G's death, 1949, took the clues left by Gurdjieff and Ouspensky and Moraviev, and he headed toward Mount Athos in Greece. Over 60 visits later and his mission complete, Robin Amos successfully connected the West with its true inner tradition that was being taught in the 20-some-odd monasteries still functioning on the peninsula of Mount Athos. Robin was a direct human link between the West and its lost inner tradition located at the last remaining outpost. Having been given clues by both G and Ouspensky at the end of their lives, Amos discovered that the geographical location of Mount Athos was literally the last remaining place on the planet Earth that maintained the teachings of the inner church so long forgotten and ignored. Robin Amos is a key figure in the connection between the Fourth Way teachings and esoteric Christianity. He was prophetic because in the early 1980s, he sensed something about the world. Its primary civilization was fundamentally immature and therefore unable to sustain its astronomical growth in intellect and population and economy. Consequently, Amos foresaw the ecological crisis and collapse that we are in the beginning stages of here in 2020. He not only saw this, but he linked the cause of this collapse to the lack of an inner spiritual tradition within the main religion within Western civilization, namely Western Christianity based within Catholicism and Protestantism. Amos was a firm believer that Western civilization was cut off from its inner teaching and spiritual roots because of several historical events, beginning with this Great Schism of 1054 CE. This divorce between Rome and Constantinople created a Western church which was based on a political structure, with the papal office gaining significance. This focus on the papacy was an enormous shift in the theology for the newly independent Western church, as it jettisoned the essentially Christian idea of theosis. This idea of theosis is a key element in the theology of the early church and in the Christian esoteric circle, as well as the Fourth Way teaching. Theosis promotes the idea that the spiritual evolution of Jesus, Mary Magdalene, the apostles, and saints is possible in anyone. When the papacy is promoted to such a large extent, there is only one person who can advance to this level, namely the Pope and only the Pope. The Eastern Church and Mount Athos, based in Constantinople, which is modern-day Istanbul in Turkey, kept the theology of theosis and its spiritual and cosmic nature, continuing to remain connected to the true spiritual roots of Jesus Christ, the apostles, and the life of the early church fathers and mothers. But as the culture of secular humanism has quickly overtaken the globe in the past 2 centuries with its sensory-based approach to human existence, the environment and the human psyche have begun to buckle under this weight. This sensory-based approach has effectively cut off humanity and creation from its spiritual source, leaving it extremely vulnerable to the law of accident and the general law, to use fourth way terminology. To Amos, the West has been churning out generation after generation of people who are completely disconnected from their spiritual nature. Therefore, there is a breakdown of what Amos calls the attitude of stewardship. In an online article from 2001 from his Praxis Research Institute website, Robin Amos is very clear regarding the repercussions of this breakdown when he lists the tragic results. Number 1, in relation of the individual to his or herself, alienation and the breakdown of mental health and happiness. Number 2, in relation to human society, a reduction in educational standards leading not only to illiteracy and incompetence, but to increasing dishonesty, social inequity, economic instability, and violence. Number 3, in relation to all species, including our own, destruction of species, beginning with the most vulnerable or those most in competition with our own. Number 4, in relation to the planet itself, progressive destruction of the environment. He ends the online essay by remarking that the removal of all Christian teaching from the educational systems of many countries in the West has led to a remarkably detrimental impact within the social structure of those countries. He lists the visible impact of the removal of Christian teachings within Western society. Number 1, a growing division between rich and poor. Number 2, a deterioration in the standard of living for a large part of the population. Number 3, a partial breakdown of public services such as health and policing. Number 4, widespread environmental decay. Number 5, a callousness with a tendency to gratuitous violence. Number 6, an increase in psychiatric sickness. And lastly, number 7, a lack of control over industry in the actions it takes that damage the environment or catastrophically damage essential reserves of raw materials. Robin Amos, George Gurdjieff, P.D. Ouspensky, Boris Moraviev, Charles Ashton, they all had one thing in common: a deep and compassionate love for God's creation. They all knew that the esoteric circle was so vitally important to preserving the teachings which civilized Homo sapiens, renewing their role in the cycle of life on this planet. Robin Amos, in particular, was a vital link between the Fourth Way teachings, Christian esotericism, and Western civilization, so desperately in need of maturation and true growth. In another December 2001 online essay from the Praxis Research Institute's website, Robin writes these words, quote, "Monks on Mount Athos not only use bells to summon worshippers to the church, but also beat hammers for the same purpose, sometimes on iron, like the cook in a cowboy film, but more often on a tuned plank of wood called a samatran. This custom was introduced centuries ago, when the Turkish conquerors forbade the use of bells. There exists a legend among the 20 main monasteries of Mount Athos, which claims that this represents Noah hammering on the ark, saying it is time to come aboard. The traditional rhythm for this call is repeated 3 times, once for fish, says the myth, once for animals, and once for man. Modern esotericism extends this to say that the idea of the ark is a description of an esoteric school. Such arks, according to this possibly recent tradition, come into being to preserve essential knowledge when it is about to become lost. The flood is sometimes described as a natural disaster that occurs in response to the corruption of human society. At other times, it is suggested that it is an event in people's minds, something that has taken them so far from what some people would call God's plan. Others speak in terms of evolutionary possibilities, or say that the planet itself is troubled by the human situation.